Morning, everyone. Thank you for coming. Hesje Eric Giles Jahojikodos. I'm from the Muskogee Creek Nation, Oklahoma. I'm here today as a board member of the National Tribal Land Association, and today you are in a carbon markets from an Indigenous perspective session. If you are an attorney and you're seeking CLE credits, I have a sign-up sheet here up at the front. Our presenters today are Bryan Van Stippen and Susan Waukon. Bryan is the program director for the National Indian Carbon Coalition. It's an initiative of the Indian Land Tenure Foundation that provides education, training, and technical assistance to American Indian tribes, Alaska Native villages and corporations, Native Hawaiian organizations, and First Nations in Canada on the development of carbon credit and renewable energy projects on tribal land. A member of the Oneida Nation of Wisconsin, Van Stippen previously served for 7 years as tribal attorney for the Ho-Chunk Nation Department of Justice in Wisconsin, where he was responsible for land acquisition and other land-related issues. He earned a bachelor's degree in business administration and a master's in computer information systems from Tarleton State University in Texas. Van Stippen is a graduate of the University of North Dakota Law School, the University of Tulsa College of Law, and the University of Arizona James E. Rodder College of Law. Why do you have so many of those? Okay. He lives with his wife and 2 children in Green Bay, Wisconsin. Susan Waukon is a program manager with the National Indian Carbon Coalition and is from Ho-Chunk of Wisconsin. We appreciate everyone's attendance today, and I will turn it over to Bryan.
So today, we're going to go through the very basics of what are carbon projects, what does the National Indian Carbon Coalition do in Indian country, and some of the steps and some of the factors that we have to take into consideration. So I'm coming from the standpoint that you guys are just getting your feet wet as to what these projects entail. There are a couple individuals in the room that we have been working with from different tribes and have given this presentation before, so it's going to be some repeat material for them, but it's always a good refresher. So basically, as Eric mentioned, my name is Bryan Van Stippen. I am the program director for the National Indian Carbon Coalition. I am a member of the Oneida Nation of Wisconsin and a tribal attorney by trade. Why do we want to focus on these issues and what are we looking at doing? We're looking at what is carbon. Basically, carbon is a greenhouse gas emission. There's many different types of greenhouse gases. We just say it's carbon in general to make life real easy. We have the life cycle of how things occur. So I always use the example that what we did for traveling here to come to this event at Pechanga. I'm in Green Bay, Wisconsin. I jump on an airplane. I fly into San Diego. I drive from San Diego to Temecula, and then we stay here for 4 days. And all of that is creating greenhouse gases and creating a carbon footprint. And we want to track that. We want to know what that is. We actually developed an application that is at our booth online. You can come and you can see what your greenhouse gas emissions would be for participating in this event. And we also have another app in which you can track your household emissions. So individuals actually do give to our organization by calculating a carbon footprint and then making a donation to the National Indian Carbon Coalition to help develop projects in Indian country. So we are developing these tools. We're trying to promote them, trying to work with conference hosts like NTLA to make sure that all the participants that are participating in this event are offsetting their carbon footprint. So we get deep into the weeds here now with what is a carbon offset and what is a carbon credit. So we are looking for the reduction in your greenhouse gas emissions. A lot of people are familiar with the California cap and trade market, which we'll get to here in a few minutes. But since we're in the state of California, they have a compliance-based market. That's what we look at. But the big thing I want you guys to take from this is what is an offset? It is 1 metric ton of carbon dioxide equivalent. So if I go outside and I work with your tribal organization, we can do a calculation on your natural resource base, depending on what it is. If it's a forest-based project, if it's an agricultural-based project, we can currently do row cropping, which our cohorts will be presenting here in a few minutes from Indigo Ag. We can do grazing, we can do row crop lands, we can do grassland-based projects. We're currently looking at doing some blue carbon projects, so projects based on seaweeds and kelps and seagrasses with some of the tribes on the West Coast. It all depends upon what your natural resource bases located on your reservation lands. We started with forest-based projects because those were the easiest and the most well-known in the industry, but obviously not every tribal nation has large forest reserves. Again, as a member of the Oneida Nation, we have about 3,000 acres of forested lands on our 65,000 acre reservation. A carbon project wouldn't work on forested lands. However, we can do croplands or grazing lands or agricultural-based projects on my reservation land. So we're engaging with my tribal leadership, trying to find out some solutions how they might be able to participate in the carbon marketplace, even though they don't have a bunch of forested lands. The backside is that when we measure these carbon credits, these offsets, we have to, again, make sure they're measurable, quantifiable, permanent, verifiable, and enforceable. Those are the 5 factors that were set by the registries on what we have to explore and examine when we are looking at the types of work we want to do with tribal nations. So we get into the 2 types of marketplaces, the voluntary and the compliance. As I mentioned, we're in the state of California. California has the cap and trade program. It's a compliance-based system, which means that organizations like oil and gas, mining, concrete manufacturers are mandated to acquire carbon credits through the exchange. Washington State is now building out their own marketplace as well, and I believe that Oregon is going to be here pretty soon. The other marketplace is the voluntary carbon space. That's the only area that we operate in at the National Indian Carbon Coalition, and there are some reasons for that, which we'll get to again in a few minutes. But how that project works, or program works, is that we at the National Indian Carbon Coalition develop relationships, which we call socially responsible organizations, to acquire credits. We do have a couple projects that are at market currently with the Fond du Lac Band of Lake Superior Chippewa Indians, as well as with the Keweenaw Bay Indian community. So those 2 projects, we're actively selling carbon credits. We've sold credits to the likes of Mass Mutual, the University of Minnesota, Airbnb, Dick's Sporting Goods. We're continually trying to develop relationships like that in which tribes have some say and are more comfortable in selling their carbon credits because leadership, staff, membership have the opportunity to provide input as to whom acquire their credits. Where on the compliance-based market, it's auction-based system, so anybody can acquire the credits, and some tribes just aren't comfortable with any organization acquiring those carbon credits. So again, we're looking at the California cap and trade. These are some of the requirements if you're going to participate in that marketplace. We have seen tribes in the state of California enter into this marketplace, specifically Yurok. They've done multiple projects now. They're doing really well. They use that revenue to reacquire their traditional land base. So they can be successful programs on the California cap and trade marketplace, but there are some concerns because there is a 100-year duration. You have to enroll those lands into the project for that 100 years. You do have to provide a limited waiver of sovereign immunity. Again, as a tribal attorney, when I was in House Counsel, a lot of times leadership did not want to waive their immunity, and often when I engage with tribal nations, that is a non-starter. And then, again, the carbon credits are sold at auction, and the question I always get was that you're just allowing polluters to continue to pollute. So again, here are some of the projects that we've seen. I don't think there has been any recent projects. The last one I want to say came on was maybe Spokane in 2016, 2015, but and Yurok did another one a little bit more recently as well. So again, we focus on the voluntary carbon market, looking at those socially responsible organizations. The one big thing to take away on the voluntary market is that carbon prices fluctuate. Right now, they're projecting the carbon industry on the voluntary side at this point in time is projected to be about a $2 billion industry, and by 2030, they're projecting it to be a $50 billion industry. So there's a lot of players coming into this space right now, a lot of different organizations trying to figure out their role, how they might be able to participate, again, add another middleman to the list because everybody wants to figure out how they might be able to make a buck on these projects because this industry is growing very quickly and will grow even more quickly in the next 7 to 8 years. So who all participates? We're looking at the buyers, as mentioned a couple times, like at the Airbnbs, Dick's Sporting Goods, universities. We're talking to Arizona State University right now as well about acquiring some of the credits. The project developers, that's a role that we play at the National Indian Carbon Coalition. We help manage the projects for the tribes, help organize, set everything up so that leadership, staff, and membership don't have to take on all that responsibility. But we vet all of the project developers that we work with to make sure that they are working in the best interest of Indian country and the best interest of that tribe. A lot of times early on, why the National Indian Carbon Coalition was created was because we had a bunch of these developers entering in Indian country and taking a large chunk of the revenue and then passing off the management for the 100-year duration to the tribes to take care of them themselves, and then step away and try to get another tribe to participate in that marketplace. So we want to make sure that the parties that we're bringing in to a tribal project, to a tribal community, understand the nuances of working with tribal government, engaging with tribal members, and understanding the cultural differences when we're trying to make these decisions to ensure that these projects are, in fact, the best interests of the tribe. And then, as I mentioned, we have the sellers on the back end, which is, again, is the role that we play, is helping make those introductions from our projects that we are developing to the buying organizations. Again, we're trying to get entities like Disney and Meta and Amazon and Microsoft and Google, trying to get conversations like those all the time. I often get approached by the oil and gas, so Shell, Exxon, Marathon, TransCanada as one of the pipeline producers, Enbridge is another one. Those organizations are very interested in the credits that we're developing on our projects. But again, I talk to leadership, staff membership, and say, hey, is this an organization that you're interested in allowing us to sell to? And for the most part, they're saying we do not want any of our credits being sold to those types of organizations. So we talked about the marketplaces. Now we're going to talk about the registries. These were developed by the California Air Resources Board. So the state of California passed state legislation about a decade ago to develop this marketplace, and they developed their registries. This is where the actual science and the verification of the projects fall into place. We want to make sure that these projects aren't just out there allowing organizations to buy credits and say they're trying to protect their environment when they're really not. So the registries were designed to make sure that the science was backed behind the projects themselves, and there are currently 3 of them in California that we engage with: ACR, Climate Action Reserve, and Vera. Each one has different types of protocols that we explore, we examine to see, again, what is the best fit for the tribal natural resource base within your reservation lands. And there's pros and cons to each of them, but again, that's a role that we help play. We do the analysis, we come work with the tribal nation, again, leadership, membership, and staff. I always try to start like a carbon team or a carbon work group, something along those lines of people that are interested to see these projects move forward on their tribal lands. And then we look at what registry, what protocol might make the most sense. So what we have are, we look at methodologies, and these are the ones that we focus on at the National Indian Carbon Coalition. Improved forest management is the easy one, because again, forest-based projects are the most well-known. Developers understand them, buyers understand them, the marketplace understands them. So a lot of the projects that have currently been developed within the United States are all based on forest-based lands. We are starting to see a transition into, again, more types of grassland projects and row crop, as well as pasture grazing lands. So the other 2 that we do use are the avoided conversion of grassland and shrubland to crop production and compost additions to grazed grasslands. And this is where I'll give Eric some kudos because he's very happy about this. We were working with the Santa Ana Pueblo on the compost additions. We had a problem because we were trying to develop the compost ourselves for the tribe, just didn't have enough material, so we did 3 1-acre test plots, and the test plots that we placed the compost on did phenomenal. You could look at a Google Earth review of those 3 1-acre plots on the reservation lands, and you can see where we added the composts to help that grazing land, that land revitalize itself. So it worked, but to the scale that we needed it to work was very difficult due to the cost of the compost that we needed to generate. So now, one of the big things that we offer to tribal nations and different groups, we are working again with some Native Hawaiian organizations. We are starting to do some work now up in Canada with First Nations. But what we offer to anybody in this room that works for a tribal nation is to develop a carbon feasibility at no cost to you. So we work with the developers to help get this feasibility analysis completed. Again, one of the big things is that there's no need to come to the table with any dollars. All I ask is that we get an MOU signed, passed via whatever your process is. Usually it's tribal resolution, because there is some data that we need to collect. And again, as a tribal attorney and a tribal member, I want to make sure that any data that's shared is maintained ownership by the tribe, and any reports or any studies that are developed are owned by the tribe. So it's important to me within that MOU to say that your data sovereignty is being protected. And that's one of the reasons why we ask for the MOU to be signed and agreed to via tribal council resolution. But basically all we need are two different things of data. We need your land base and your natural resource density. So again, we're focusing right now on just forest-based projects. All I need is a forest inventory and a shape file saying this is where our lands are, and we can generate a feasibility study for your tribe at no cost to you. And that just gives you some idea, gives some indication as to what the potential is. Obviously, our goal at the National Indian Carbon Coalition is to protect and preserve your tribal natural resources rather than extract or exploit those tribal natural resources. But at the end of the day, leadership wants to know how much money could potentially be generated from these projects. And that's always a big factor. So we're going to get into the project steps and how this process all works. So once we develop a feasibility study and we present that back to tribal leadership staff membership, we ask the question, is there interest to continue to move forward? And then we get in the actual development of the project. I mentioned Fond du Lac in Keweenaw Bay a little bit earlier. It took me approximately 3 years to go through their internal meeting process, discussions with all of their internal committees, discussions in front of tribal council, discussions with membership to make sure that everybody was comfortable to proceed with the development of the project. So a lot of the work that we do at the National Indian Carbon Coalition is that front-end engagement, helping educate all those stakeholders at the tribe as to what these projects entail. Because they are controversial in some capacities, there are indigenous organizations out there that don't want tribes to participate in this marketplace. I mean, that's just something that we see in Indian country for whatever type of project that we do. So we want to be extremely aware and cognizant of the fact that there's going to be some naysayers out there. We have to be able to address those questions and concerns and make sure, again, that these are the right fit for you. And if at this process, at any point in time, the tribe says, you know what, we're just not comfortable, that's fine with me. I'm not going to pressure a tribal nation into making a decision that is not a good fit for their land base. But to me, it's still a win because we're having the conversation and you're looking at how you're going to be able to address climate change on your reservation lands, how you might be able to incorporate more sustainable management practices over your tribal natural resources. Again, so keeping that natural resource base in the ground, and we're not simply just extracting and exploiting how we've done for generations to make dollars on our reservation lands. So again, I'm going to pass this off to Susan. Then we are going to go into some guys that are online to present on more of the row crop type projects, more of the grazing pasture land projects. We received a USDA Conservation Innovation Grant last year to roll out this type of a program in Indian country. We are looking for tribal nation producers, but also individual tribal member producers. So row crops, grazing lands. My goal is anybody that's running bison, we want to be able to do a grazing project on bison lands. So there's opportunities for the tribes themselves, but also for individual tribal member landowners if there's interest to participate in this marketplace. Susan and I have a booth out in the atrium there. Please feel to stop by at any point in the next few days to pick up material, have a discussion, grab our information. On top of doing the feasibility study, my statement is if you invite us to your reservation lands to do a one-on-one presentation, we'll show up in person to do that because I feel it's extremely important to not only visit the tribal lands that we'll be engaging with, but for everybody to get to know our organization, who we are as individuals, to build that relationship of trust, because that's one of the hardest things to move forward is to actually get that relationship built. And it does take time. I mean, this isn't decisions that are going to be made overnight. It takes a while to get these projects moving forward and alleviating everybody's concerns. So again, we'll help develop a feasibility study. We'll come visit your reservation lands if you invite us. I'm not going to knock your door down because I don't feel that's appropriate. But we we hope to be able to work with as many tribes as we can in the United States, as well as those Native Hawaiian organizations and First Nations in Canada. So any type of interest, again, please feel free to visit us at our booth. I'm going to pass it off to Susan so she can talk about project development and a couple of other projects that we currently have that we're in the process of developing as well.
As Bryan mentioned, we used to work together. I was his boss, and now he's my boss. So moral of the story is be nice to people. You never know where it's going to take you. As Bryan mentioned, Susan Waukon, citizen of the Ho-Chunk Nation of Wisconsin. So yay, Wisconsin. So Bryan had mentioned quite a few of these in his presentation. So we'll just take you through the project steps. There is 5 main project steps. The first one is the feasibility study, which is about a 3-month time to complete. The feasibility study will help the tribe determine if they want to move forward with the project. So that is the first step. Second step is the inventory, quantification, growth, yield modeling, harvest schedule, and reporting. And this is where we work with project development and forest verification firms that actually go out on the ground and do all this stuff. They do the modeling, they check the harvest. The density, as what Bryan had mentioned, the natural resource density as well. Third step, verification and registry review. So you take all that information from the second step and we have to develop a greenhouse gas emissions plan, and that is submitted to the registry for verification. And fourth step, credit sales, that occurs during the project development and after project development. One of the things that we're looking for when we do credit sales is your story. So I think that's always important, is, you know, how you hear land back, and what Bryan had mentioned about using that income to buy more land. So those are the kind of stories that we want to hear from the tribes is, you know, how are you going to use that revenue? Not that we need to know, it just helps us develop that story. So when we're doing carbon sales, it helps to create that story for you and to get the buyers to hopefully buy your credits on an annual basis. The last step is the monitoring, reporting, and verification and capacity building. This says 40 to 100 years, but as Bryan had mentioned, we just work on the voluntary market, so it's a 40-year time window. And we do contract with you guys, with the tribe, for this duration as well. So we plan on being here for the long haul, so hopefully we'll end up retiring from here. It's a lot of clicks. So the Tribal Land Conservation Initiative is a partnership with the Nature Conservancy, and we help tribes together implement sustainable management practices, but it also helps us to develop those carbon credit projects as well, and to be able to sell them. So some of the highlights of the Land Conservation Initiative is NIC, National Indian Carbon Coalition, is the project proponent. So we are the ones that are contracting with all the other third parties, as I had mentioned, the project developer or any of the verification, like the forest verification firms and such. So they won't be contracting with the tribe directly. They'll be contracting with NIC or ILTF. Bryan had mentioned this. We cover all the upfront costs for the tribe. So when the credit sales do occur, we try to recoup some of those costs. And as I had mentioned, the carbon sales as well. We do the selling of the carbon credits initially, and then on an annual basis as well. Bryan mentioned these 2 projects that we have right now on the market. The Fond du Lac Band of Lake Superior Chippewa. This is a Minnesota tribe. Estimated net revenue is $5 million on 8,200 acres of land. And as you can see here, the offset is 77.1 metric tons of carbon dioxide. The Kewanabay Indian Community, this is Michigan. And this is also a forest carbon sequestration project, or as you saw in a previous slide, it's the improved forest management. This is 16,500 acres. And projected revenue is $8 million. And I know Bryan didn't mention this, or if we should, we have 2 more projects this year. Okay. So we have one project in the Mississippi and one in Montana, both probably by the end of this year. And those are quite large, about 77,000 acres. So quite large, as I had said. Got Bryan's contact information up there. If you need my contact information, I do have a card out there. So this is the end of my 6 months. So after this, I can't say I'm new any longer. So, and that's it. And I think we're going to move into the 2 people that we have online to talk more about the grazing and soils.
But now I'm going to pass it off to Ryan over at Indigo. As I mentioned, we have a USDA Conservation Innovation Grant with Indigo that we started about July of last year. We're looking for the tribal nation producers, the individual tribal member producers, focusing on row crop lands, focusing on grazing, pasture land type projects. So Ryan has some slides, I believe. Are you all good that you're able to share your screen and we should be able to hear you fine?
All right. Well, thank you all. Thanks, Bryan. I appreciate the introduction. I'm Ryan Durkeen. I work with Indigo in our research side of the business, working on the carbon markets and trying to figure out, what the impact of these management practices have overall. Currently, we have a lot of research projects in the row crop space, but one of the areas that we are looking to expand to is grazing lands. And in order to do that, we have to build the necessary data sets that we can accurately and precisely describe what the effect of those management practices are on grazing. And so I'll kind of go through a little bit of the data that's out there just as a reference point, and then I'll also talk a little bit about the project that we have, and then I'll pass it off to Bryan Bartle. Unfortunately, I have to hop off a little bit. I have another engagement after this in about 25 minutes. And so if there is any questions, please direct them towards Bryan Van Stippen there, or Bryan Bartle at the end, and I will try and assist in any way that I can. So why are we interested in grazing? Well, there's a lot of land that encompasses grazing. So this is just a picture of our farm. I grew up on a beef cattle operation in Missouri. So we have a lot of cool season grasses, namely tall fescue. And we've been implementing rotational grazing for almost 15 years now. So I just have an example of kind of what that looks like, right? So we have a high density herd, right? And we're giving them small tracts of pastures to graze for a set period of time. You can kind of see what the impact of that is for about a 24-hour period. So this is the kind of projects that we're interested in understanding what those long-term effects are on soil carbon. Let me see if there it goes. So when we look at the total number of acreages across the U.S., right, we can kind of look at the eastern half of the United States, which is mainly our improved pastures, right? They are usually non-native grasses, typically cool season, although when you get into the south, they could be like Bermuda grass or other such species. But you can see they're not as dominant across the landscape as our agricultural lands for row crops, but there are some pockets in there through Kentucky and Tennessee and eastern Texas and Missouri and parts of Iowa. But the vast majority of that landscape resides in the western U.S. And there's just a lot of land that encompasses. So if we include both of these types of maps, we're looking at somewhere around 600 to 650 million acres of grasslands across the United States alone. And how do these different environments change, right? So if you look at the east versus the west, you're going to have species differences. You're going to have impacts on rainfall and temperature, and so all those. Excuse me, I apologize. Having allergies flare up. So all of those things we need to take into consideration when we're developing these projects, right? But a lot of the land holdings are going to be out west, right? That's where predominantly the grazing and grasslands are going to be located. So when we look at grazing systems, we can kind of categorize these, and I've kind of put these into discrete buckets, although you can kind of think of these as more of a continuum. But what I'm trying to emphasize here is basically going from grazing practices that are either neutral or negative to soil carbon, which could include continuous grazing, meaning that cattle or bison or some type of ungulate is out on the landscape with very little management being performed with that particular species. And they're just basically allowed to roam wherever they go and able to graze as much as they want in any particular area. And then we generally see having either neutral or negative impacts to the environment. Then as we go through that particular set of grazing systems, you can go into, let's say, slow rotational grazing, where the grazing system is maybe you have one or two or a few paddocks and they're rotated very infrequently. And what we typically observe in those is that there's little impact on soil carbon. Where you start seeing the real impacts of improving the landscape and actually sequestering carbon is when you get into these higher density and quicker rotations, right? So when you're looking at strategic moves of about every 3 to 4 days, and then and you continue down this intensive grazing, or you're moving them once, maybe every day or once every few hours, when you get into mob grazing, and you're really increasing the density of the animal's impact for a short period of time, that's where we really see the gains in soil carbon. And so we want to better characterize what those systems look like in those different environments based on the maps that I showed prior to that. So what do we have here? So these are just a few studies that I'm trying to share out. What we're trying to see here is when you go into the literature, there is very many studies that there aren't very many studies, but the studies that do exist kind of show like when you're using these high intensity grazings, even in short periods of time, you can increase the soil carbon. And that's what we want to better understand, right? So this is one study that was done in Wisconsin. And so they were measuring 78 pastures that were rotationally grazed, and they were looking at different attributes of these pastures, right? They were looking at what are the intrinsic properties, soil properties of that you can't really change, like your pH or your texture, how the land was used, what was the age of the pasture, the region, that sort of stuff. And then we get into the management practices, right? So grazing on the stocking rates, or how long they were in a particular paddock, how long that paddock had a rest period, and then looking at your pasture management, like how did you fertilize it, what were the types of species present, did you hay in those pastures, and all of that. And so when they did this analysis from these 78 pastures in Wisconsin, one of the things that they found was pasture age was the overarching dominant factor, right? So the longer you have a perennial in the landscape, that is the one driving factor that increases soil carbon. But what was the next predominant attribute? It was grazing management. And specifically, there were three of them. The first was time in the paddock, the stocking density, and the rest period of that pasture, right? And the remaining ones were much less impactful, right? So soil texture, while it has an impact, it was less than the management. And then the pasture management, where you're looking at species and haying and fertilizer, those all fell down at the very bottom of the scale. And so what we can observe from these 78 pastures in Wisconsin that they analyzed was the number one, or the three driving factors that were for grazing management were how long were they in those paddocks, what was the density of those animals in those paddocks, and how long did that recovery period last. And so when we look at this overall, this is kind of breaking this out and trying to see like, well, what was the stocking density there that how it impacted that until it reached sort of an equilibrium. And so from 0 to 100, there was a general trend upward, so that once you reached about 100 animal units per acre, that's where you seem to maximize the amount of carbon, right? The same goes for the time in paddocks. So when we want to look at what was the impact of the day, right? The overarching thing was less than a day seemed to have the most impact on that soil. And then finally, the rest periods. How long were the rest periods given before it was, not impactful, right? And so that was about that 45-day period. And so the overall arching general guidelines that they gave was you need higher stocking densities, shorter grazing events, about adequate rest periods, and leaving a residual height, right? So those are the overarching guidelines. And so those are the types of things we want to study with this grant, right? So I know this is a busy screen, but what we're really trying to drive at here for this particular project that Bryan discussed, the NRCS grant, is we want to find producers that have been continuously grazing their landscape and are looking to make a transition, because we want to understand what that transition looks like and how long that transition takes for the soil carbon really to build in the system, and what does that curve, so basically how quickly can carbon be sequestered when you go from, let's say, a continuous graze system to a rotationally grazed system. And so what we're trying to identify here is, some key metrics, right? But overarching, what we're trying to better understand is, when we go from one to the other, how does that look? And so we basically need two of those treatments there. We need the continuously grazed treatment as a control, and we need a rotationally grazed system as the new way of looking at grazing to better understand that. And so I've kind of outlined a few different types of options here, what that could look like. But in essence, we need both of those to better understand what the overall impact is, because you can have year-to-year fluctuations based off of rainfall and drought and other environmental impacts. And so we really need those two options. What does a hypothetical outline look like based off of that prior screen? Well, you could have, let's say, in one operation, you have it being continuously grazed and part of it an amp graze. And so we go in and we measure something like this, right? So a portion of that is being amped grazed, part of it's being continuously grazed. Conversely, you could split your herd, right? So you may have one full herd, but one half of your property, you say, I'm going to just allow that to be continuously grazed, and the other half of the property, I'm going to rotationally graze. And then we're going to come in and measure the soil in, let's say, some key areas of the property, and then track those over time in that split scenario. And the third option could be a neighbor, right? So you could have your operation is going to fully transition to rotational grazing, and then you have a neighbor that's nearby or across the fence line that is looking to just maintain his current grazing status, right? He isn't going to make any changes. And so in that instance, we can measure the changes you're making compared to your neighbor across the fence line. And so those are all sorts of scenarios that we would be looking at for participation in this particular project. And with that, I can take a few questions if you have some. Otherwise, I will pass it over to Bryan.
Thanks, Ryan. And so, yeah, kicking it off. So basically, with this partnership, Ryan's the grazing livestock side, and I handle the cropping side, row crop agriculture. So, which is another exciting opportunity. I'll kind of run through some of these slides just because, specifically with the carbon market, Bryan and Susan have already kind of hit on a lot of that, but really want to get into, specifically what is our program, what's this partnership about, and what are those next steps if this is of interest and this applies to you and potentially your community. So within carbon markets, once again, I'll try to make this one a quick overview because I think Bryan already hit it pretty well. Especially in the scope 1 opportunity here, it's really about working with companies that, for multiple reasons, want to reduce their carbon footprint, want to be able to report out that they're being environmental stewards. Obviously, the first part of that is looking internally, looking yourself in the mirror and thinking about what are your processes and what are ways you can improve from an environmental perspective. Unfortunately, for a lot of these companies, to be truly carbon neutral is very difficult. Bryan mentioned flying, right? As it is today, getting from point A to point B, it's very hard to do that carbon, without creating an environmental impact. And so kind of to fill those gaps here in the short term until we do have a solution there, that's where carbon credits come in. And that's an opportunity for forestry. That's an opportunity for a lot of industries. But specifically kind of talking about agriculture, that's a newer opportunity that has kind of propped up to be a part of that nature-based solution for these companies. And kind of works. These companies set out targets. They kind of do the measurement internally of, hey, using New Belgium Brewery and Fat Tire, they've mapped out how much carbon emissions it takes to make a beer. And then working backwards, all right, how can they improve their processes? And then also for everything they can't necessarily improve and work out of their system, how many carbon credits do they need? And then really what this is about is, hey, now let's incentivize a grower, incentivize a community to adopt a new practice that's going to have a positive environmental impact. Let's measure and verify that, really quantify what that impact is, and be able to package that up through a registry, through that monitoring and evaluation, to give that back to a company to say, hey, this is an opportunity for you to address those emissions. And specifically agriculture, once again, there's a suite of solutions in this space. Agriculture is a very attractive option, primarily because when we think about carbon credits, there's kind of two pools or two opportunities, mechanisms to create a carbon credit. One is sequestration, which is, with forestry, it's actually taking carbon dioxide or other greenhouse gases from the atmosphere and sequestering them in the soil through biomass and soil structure. Agriculture is also very attractive because there's also this opportunity for abatements, which is a fancy word for avoiding. So thinking about nitrogen fertilizer, which, if done inefficiently, creates nitrous oxide emissions. It's an opportunity. If we can improve that, we can also calculate the opportunity where you avoided nitrous oxide emissions. And that's an opportunity where you kind of have both sides of that coin. You're not just sequestering and pulling greenhouse gases from the atmosphere into the soil, but you're also avoiding them being emitted to begin with. And so that's where agriculture, especially for nature-based solutions, is a really attractive option amongst the potential opportunities for carbon credits. And when we talk about practices, just at a very high level, it's looking at cover cropping, thinking about how many days, do you have in a field, and, how can you maximize the amount of growing days? And if you don't have a crop in there, say post harvest, how can you get a live root in the ground using photosynthesis to sequester carbon, to, circulate nitrogen? That's an opportunity, probably one of the most the easiest opportunities to think about of, hey, if you didn't have a plant in there before, if you had a fallow period, how can you take advantage of that time that it was just laying fallow and not producing anything? How can you get a cover crop in there and help, sequester more carbon, as well as the other impacts there when it talks about building soil structure, making a more resilient system, is a great opportunity. Additionally, reducing your tillage, that's another big one, an opportunity both in regards to reducing tillage allows sequestration through continuing to build up that soil structure, on top of, if you don't till, you're also not releasing carbon that was already, kind of stabilized in the soil. So that's another great opportunity and another good example of how agriculture works with this, not just sequestration, but also abatement. And it's really an opportunity. We're today focusing on carbon, and that's that offset opportunity. Definitely really excited to share at another point about kind of some of our other sustainability programs where we're looking at more of a sustainable sourcing grain. But as Bryan mentioned, it's a major opportunity. This is from McKinsey consulting firm talking about, the potential for this market is $50 billion. And so really looking at this partnership and looking at Indigo's role is, it's not the only solution. We do have forestry, we do have some other nature-based solutions, but how do we leverage agriculture to be a part of this industry, both from an economic perspective to capture some of this $50 billion to put into rural communities, but then also how do we, address the supply issue, that we're going to need a lot of carbon offsets in the future to hit a lot of these goals. And specifically, as Bryan already mentioned, this chart, it kind of shows the percentage of Fortune 500 companies that have made sustainability targets, have made pledges. And the biggest call out here is that not all carbon credits are created equal, as Bryan already alluded to. That bottom green, that's just companies basically saying, hey, I'm going to be carbon neutral. The real big shift that we've seen since 2015, which was when the Paris Accord was signed, is that specifically this is, companies following this, what's called the RE100. It's basically science-based targeting. It's kind of a voluntary standard that companies are following to ensure that they're having a science-based approach to their targets. Distilling that down, what does that mean? It means that this is registry issued carbon credits. So when we think about the demand, when we think about that 50 billion, it's going to be registry issued, because you need some of that validity. You need that scientific community to really come in and verify and be on board with, that the math is right, that the science is sound. Because the other word that does get thrown around, and rightfully so, is greenwashing. And that's something that definitely Indigo takes very seriously, that if this is not done correctly, it is an opportunity to be not part of the solution, part of the problem. But that is where registries come in. That's where a registry comes and makes sure that, once again, the methodology, the math, and the science that we're using is sound, that there's an opportunity for input, that, different stakeholders can come in and really, critique our approach and make sure that we're incorporating all of that insight to make sure that, once again, everybody's on board with the way we're going about the program. In addition, it creates market confidence through, there's somebody checking our homework. It's not just Indigo saying, hey, this is how much carbon was sequestered, or this is how much greenhouse gases were abated. There's somebody else checking our homework and verifying that the math is right, that we're not overstating what we're doing, to make sure that, once again, we're actually driving the change that these companies want to see. And with that, why Indigo? Yeah.
Hey, Bryan, I don't think we're getting any volume with your video.
Shoot. Give me 1 second. I really wanted to show this. How much time do we have, actually? Oh, man. Well, maybe I can't share the video. The video was just going to share.
I can share it on my end.
All right. There we go. The video was just going to share, and we can share it out later. So we actually have done this twice now. So we just finished up our second carbon crop. So being able to not only establish, that this is an opportunity, but then to be able to repeat it, it's something we're really excited about. It's a much streamlined process today than what we were 2 years ago. And that's also where we look at the opportunity, especially now to expand our program, is, hey, we figured it out. We have a lot more of the process, the technology in place to support growers and communities to be able to participate in a soil carbon program, which is really exciting. We just closed our third carbon crop. The data collection window ended here this month. And so we're really excited now to get on to the fourth crop, which is, once again, really exciting. It's not just a hypothetical anymore. We're actually doing this and selling carbon credits and paying growers, which is really exciting. The other reason, why Indigo, with our program, the biggest thing that we really love to push out there is flexibility. You can see our contract, it quite honestly is more of an agreement than it is a contract. It's very flexible. Basically, you can walk away at any time. We obviously are confident that, once you start participating in the program, you're not going to want to leave. But we made this very grower, community friendly that, hey, at any point, if you want to terminate the contract, you can do that. And that's completely fine. In addition, it's not a program where we say, hey, we dictate you have to do A, B, or C. It's an opportunity. We have agronomic resources. We work with you to figure out where are you at today in your operation and what are some opportunities to work around the margins. Say, hey, let's talk about planting a cover crop. Maybe you're not ready for a cover crop. Let's talk about how we can reduce tillage maybe, or add a new crop to the rotation. It is really the flexibility of figuring out what practices do you want to implement on your operation, and how far do you want to go and how fast. It's not a, hey, you got to go no-till, hey, you have to plant a cover crop today. So a lot of flexibility built into the program. There's no cost to growers. And we'll even talk about a little bit later, specifically with this partnership that we have with the National Indian Carbon Coalition. We actually also provide additional funding up front to cover some of those implementation costs, cover crop seed, thinking about transitioning to a reduced or no-till system. And regardless, there's no payment. You don't have to pay for soil sampling or pay to participate in the program. That said, part of that also is, the grower community gets at least 75% of the carbon revenue. So that 25% of, whatever we sell that carbon credit for, that kind of covers our costs when it comes to soil sampling and verification. And that's also really exciting because you're not locked into a price. Every year we're going to sell this carbon credit for a new price. And every year, thus far, that price has been increasing. And every year, when we sell that carbon credit, the grower and community get 75% of that. And it's really coming down to just our incentives are aligned. And, in our program, in both from Nick and Indigo, we want to make sure you and your growers are as successful as possible. Not only, in regards to sequestering the most carbon, getting the highest price for that, because when you win, we win. That's also how we make money. Buyer network, we'll kind of hit on that one. I think that I just want to echo Bryan's sentiment as well. We've definitely been approached by a lot of different companies, especially petrol. We don't work with petrol companies. I think we have a suite of buyers, a network of buyers that are not only excited to work with us, but are aligned with our mission in trying to make a more sustainable agricultural system. And that's definitely something we very much, as far as input from you and your communities when you participate, that's definitely something we take to heart. And then, partners in the journey. This is where our commercial program is currently eligible. I do not want this to dissuade anyone in the room, though. If you are in a state that is currently not listed on there, for this project, that's completely fine. With Nick in this partnership, we're willing to work outside of our typical territory to make sure that we can, bring this program to you and your community. Well, there's a great slide we'll share out later about all those benefits. Once again, was just mentioning, don't be alarmed if your state is not listed here. like I just said, definitely reach out. We will bring this program to you and your community if you're in one of these states that is not currently eligible. That's definitely not a barrier to entry. Um, Current eligible crop list. So these are the crops that we currently can model as part of our program. The one that I definitely wanted to call out that we don't have official word on, but we're working really hard to incorporate hemp into the program. So if you do have hemp in your rotation, don't don't think that disqualifies you. We're working hard to see if we can work around that, to make sure that you can participate in the program. I'll keep running forward. I think this one, it just goes without saying. There's agronomic reasons also for these practices. You know, to adopt a cover crop to reduce your tillage, it's definitely, the most success we're going to have with growers is going to be, if you're not just bought in for the carbon credit, but you're bought in on the holistic approach, that this is going to help build a more resilient system through increasing soil health, being able to reduce input cost. And then, yeah, in a very simplified way, this is the 10 steps that we go through with a grower, from engaging with that grower to getting that, producing a carbon credit and getting it, getting it to a buyer. On the generate side, when it talks, working with growers, working, on what type of practices they can adopt, and then thinking about getting the data and monitoring. We, Indigo works directly with growers, but we also work with a supplier ecosystem. And that's really the best way to describe it. Our kind of theory of this is, how do we get an entire industry and community speaking the same language and having the same goals as far as soil health, grower profitability. Obviously, a huge part of that is NIC, National Indian Carbon Coalition. We also have other partners as well. You can see some, ag retail, but really thinking, how do we support a grower, making sure they have the most success agronomically when they're adopting these practices for the first time. And then, we do work with that registry. We work with the Climate Action Reserve when it comes to the verification and monitoring, quantification. And then lastly, Indigo goes directly to buyers. We have contracts with, these are just some of the names, where we are able to, supply them with a registry issued high quality carbon credit. And that really comes out, once again, I think the quality really stands out when it comes to this program, and why registries are important, right? It's how do we connect companies in that carbon credit with the farm gate? Obviously, a North Base isn't going to visit every grower that participates in their program. So, but they need to trust and have that confidence that, the environmental impact that we say happens actually does happen, so that, that they're really driving the change they want to see. And this is a good example of that. So once again, one of our buyers is New Belgium, as part of their Fat Tire program, where Fat Tire beer is, certified carbon neutral. And it's an opportunity, as you can see here, we produce carbon credits. And as mentioned, New Belgium has worked with the Carbon Neutral Coalition to map out what is the greenhouse gas footprint of Fat Tire beer. And then they've improved their processes. They continue to improve their process to reduce that footprint. But in the meantime, for all the emissions they do have, they do buy from Indigo to cover those carbon footprints in those offsets. So it's just an exciting example of how this works in reality, and obviously New Belgium's a fantastic partner of ours. Yeah, and as mentioned, we've gone through 2 of these already. This is from the first crop. We were able to get 437 growers through the program, pay out about $3.75 million in our first year, which is really exciting. Looking at upwards of about 2 million acres for our third crop. So just really excited about the progress. And once again, it's getting a little less novel, a little less new every year. Every time we repeat it, it becomes a little smoother. And so just really excited to be able to engage and increase the participation in this program as it continues to grow. So my last slide, I swear. I really want to highlight the partnership though. How does this impact, the unique opportunity for you all? It really is a carbon program plus. So ideally we're getting fields enrolled into our carbon credit program, Carbon by Indigo. But in addition, as Bryan mentioned, we have this grant. We do have some funding from USDA to be able to help, support that transition, especially in the early years, where we can help cover some of the cost in regards to cover crop seed or equipment. In addition, you'll get personalized agronomic support on working with you with your operations and thinking about what practices can be adopted to qualify for the program, as well as just to improve soil health and improve an operation. On the data collection, that's a big part of our program, is being able to accurately measure what happened on that field. We do need data. That said, Indigo is going to help support, basically a white glove treatment, one-on-one support, helping with data entry to make sure that isn't a barrier to entry. And then additionally, I think, the financial support and making, just working with you and making sure, if there's any road bumps along the way, making sure we can usher your operations, your growers through this program to make sure that they can qualify and participate in a program. So with that, I can share it back and answer any questions.
So we have one more question, and since we got rolling late, we're going to kind of do this as fast and furious.
Is there a limited number of acres that is required in order to be in this MOU?
For forested lands, we would say that we want a minimum of 3,000 acres to make the project economically viable. Bryan, what are you looking for when we're looking at row crop or grazing?
Yeah, that's a great question. For row crop, we will absolutely work with you regardless of the acreage. I would say it's typically 150, but for this project, for this program, we're willing to be flexible and work with any type of acreage limit. Oh my goodness. The grazing is a little different just because it is a study. So they do need a minimum acreage. Let me follow up on that one real quick.
I think that was around the same,
question.
Was around 150 acres for grazing land. Row crop lands, again, if it's whatever crop you have, we want to make sure that a tribal producer is able to participate in this marketplace. So the program is designed to get anybody that is interested the opportunity to be enrolled into the Indigo program. Because we are focusing solely on our forest-based projects. So right now we have maybe 150,000 acres of forested lands with the 6 projects we currently have in place. We will have 2 more projects coming online. Hopefully by the end of the year, that will enroll approximately another 90,000 acres. On the row crop, Bryan, what did you have for your participants currently? And these are everybody that Indigo is engaged with, not just tribal projects.
Yeah. So like for currently for our 4th crop, so it'd be the 2023 crop, we have a little under 6 million acres enrolled across that geography that I showed, basically east of the Rockies.
What was the amount again?
Little under 6 million.
Yeah, 6 million. So we are currently engaging with some individual tribal member producers in Oklahoma on their land bases. Those will be the first enrollees. The grant started late. It took a long time to get awarded the funding. And then unfortunately, USDA cut our grant funds by 1/3. So we had to do some reprogramming. But now we're finally able to go out here into Indian country and announce this grant program to try to get some participation. We're hoping that we'll have a round 2 of funding here in the very near future to continue with this program, but we feel pretty confident that once we get Indigo's name out there alongside the National Indian Carbon Coalition, that this will be a program that we can get a lot more tribal nations and those individual tribal member producers to participate in.
I have a question. One of the beginning slides mentioned that one of the reasons why tribes might be hesitant to get into this is that there are requirements of a number of years, up to 100 years. And so also in the slide for Indigo mentioned that at any point in the process, there's this possibility of walking away from Indigo specifically. But how do those two things tie together? One, there's a time restriction, and one specifically there isn't. Is that just that you would then work with another organization?
Well, again, we're looking at different types of project types, and the beauty with Indigo's program is that we wanted to design it to ensure that if there was any hiccups along the way or the landowner was not interested, if it wasn't working for them, that they were able to withdraw from the program. Because they have basically multiple different landowners, through the agricultural-based programs, you can withdraw at any point in time. On the forested ends, there is that minimum time frame. So Vera does have a new protocol that's 30 years that we're trying to implement into Indian country. We're using American Carbon Registry currently for our projects we have right now, and that's the 40-year duration. And then those lands would have to be enrolled in that program for the entirety of that duration. The beauty, again, on the voluntary market space is that if we do run into issues down the road, because these projects are developed on an annual basis, and we sell the credits on an annual basis, that if there are concerns, we can look at how we might be able to withdraw the project at that point in the future.
You mentioned Vera. Is that a nonprofit? Is that a governmental organization, or what exactly is the registry?
So the registries, I believe Vera is considered a nonprofit. They take a very minimal amount of dollars to operate their registries. I think they take like 18 cents per carbon credit that's sold. So as I enroll a project into the marketplace, again, we were using American Carbon Registry with the Fond du Lac, Band du Lac Superior Chippewa project. We generated like 860,000 credits for this annual year. And then through the program that we designed, we cover those expenses so the tribe doesn't have to come to the table with any capital. And then the registry certifies those credits. So I'm able to go out there and then sell those carbon credits on the open market. Bryan had shown one of the slides, like that's what we see on the website. It lists all the credits that were developed, lists the credits that were for sale. And then what we do is that we ensure that we retire the credits on the behalf of whatever organization is buying them so that those credits cannot then be resold on any sort of secondary market. And we're going to do one more question because we're right at time. And again, feel free to come visit the booth for the next couple of days. Susan and I will be out there.
Thank you. So some of us use the USDA EQIP program to get our fields started. Like you said, most of it is the planning stages, and then we've exhausted that function of the program's requirements. So if, say, we wanted to look into this, and you said you use some of the USDA funding, that would be probably supplemental?
Yep, so a lot of these funding sources that we have from the USDA work hand in hand with the EQIP dollar sign. So that's where one of the benefits, when I do my reporting back to the USDA, I say, how does this work hand in hand with any sort of EQIP dollars that the tribe or the individual tribal member may have received? So Eric is passing out the surveys. Please feel to fill those out. Again, we had to try to make up some time, so fast and furious. Thank you for your participation today. Please feel free to come ask Susan and I any questions. Again, I thoroughly enjoy this type of work, but these are controversial projects. There's a lot of negative publicity out there right now in the media on which these projects are getting beat up a little bit. We want to make sure at the National Indian Carbon Coalition that we are developing high quality, high integrity carbon projects that are going to benefit your tribal community and your tribal land base. If we're not going to do that type of work, and at any point again in that process, there are concerns, we're able to just stop that program right there at that point in time because again, these are making sure that these projects are in the best interest of your tribal lands and your tribal natural resources. And we wouldn't be doing this work if we didn't think that's made a difference. So again, we appreciate your guys' time today. Feel free to visit us again at our booth, and look forward to hearing from you guys in the next couple days. Thank you very much.